This is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Kane and Olgun back. Round 9 of the NBL in the books, and that means that we are getting very, very close to the halfway mark of NBL 26. And perhaps the last few weeks here, the most interesting of the season. Olgun Ulic has been all over it. He's been at arenas right across Australia. And Olgs, before we get into some of these topics, this might be the first time this season. We know that the podcast is looking very nice, and we've got some video now that we can do, and we're improving this thing. But we've been all over the country. You've been all over Australia. I've been all over the US. This feels nice to just settle in. We're both in our home bases, and we can really dive into what we've seen across the last weekend of NBL and perhaps moving forward.
I like the routine. I like that I get to spend an hour in traffic here in Sydney to come into the studio here in Moore Park, here at the Disney lot. I like that. But look, most importantly, I like being able to go to games. I'm getting to a lot of Illawarra Hawks games. I got to a Sydney Kings games. I like this routine that I'm in right now. And it's crazy. You say we're not even halfway into the season. Most teams have played, 14 games? We're not even halfway through. So all of our conceptions so far, they're probably going to be out the window in a couple of weeks' time.
Hey, before we get to these topics, we've got Melbourne United. Interesting defensive stuff we want to break down. Rotation changes, perhaps Adelaide and Sydney, different situations that they're in. I want to show some love for Karim Lopez. And hey, I've got something to say about the cheeseburgers. We love Hungry Jacks. I've got something to say about the cheeseburgers. I saw something. We're going to break that down. So we've got lots to get to. Before we get started, I just have to ask. Last weekend, Olgun, you really jinxed Melbourne United. You put out an article there. You said, this is the greatest franchise we've ever seen in the history of the sport of basketball. Get the statue for Dean Vickerman. And then they promptly lost 2 games in a row. So did you jinx anyone this weekend? Did you get through unscathed?
I didn't jinx anyone because Kane, I did no work this week.
That's
I chose to abstain from doing any work because I didn't want to jinx anyone, and great success.
Some people say work smarter, not harder. Olgun Ulic says just don't work at all. Just watch basketball. So that's what he did. But when he does decide to work, you can find his work at espn.com.au. Also, as we say every week, make sure you get involved in the show. If you're watching on YouTube, jump in the comments. Give us your takes. Give us your feedback. And, of course, on the audio platforms that rate and review and all that kind of stuff. We don't call it out enough, Olgs, but we do appreciate the sport. And we love it when people get involved in the show. So you mentioned the Sydney Kings, and it was interesting. Fascinating games across round 9. Adelaide and the Sydney Kings, you put a note down in our little chat that potential rotation changes to some big, big names when it comes to Australian hoops. So take it away. What did you see? And you can nail it down to the separate teams here between the Kings and also the 36ers.
So Sydney Kings, they were forced into a move, in effect, because Matthew Dellavedova was out with illness for this game against the Illawarra Hawks. And Sydney Kings won their 4th straight game. They look really, really good. They have an identity now. It's playing physically, defensively. It's playing with pace. And you look who's on the floor. It's Kendrick Davis as the point guard. You have 2 spaces next to him in Bull Kowal and Jalen Galloway. Xavier Cooks as another creator on the floor, and then Tim Suarez. And so I'm thinking, where is the room for Delhi or Delhi's skill set in that lineup, right? It feels as though the most effective way they're going to play is KD, spacer, Xavier Cooks, Tim Suarez, or Kendrick Davis, spacer, maybe a Quat Noi, and Xavier Cooks at the 5. So it feels like there's better balance on the floor when there's just 2 of the Davis, Cooks, Delhi on the floor. And when you're looking at those players in a vacuum, you want to do your best to maximize Kendrick Davis and Xavier Cooks. They're the 2 priorities on that team. There's a similar thing happening in Adelaide right now, which is Bryce Cotton and Dejan Vasiljevic are both really talented players, but there's a question in whether they can coexist, whether they can be sustainable on the floor together, especially defensively. And so this is a really bold decision from Mike Wells, the head coach, to say, DJ Vasiljevic, you're a really talented player. This says nothing about your talent. But our goal here is to maximize Bryce Cotton and to fill the skill sets that he doesn't have. So we need to put bigger bodies around him. We need to put defensive personnel around him. And unfortunately, DJ Vasiljevic doesn't fit that mold. And so they've opted for, they obviously have Flynn Cameron there already, but they've opted for Matt Kenyon. I think they'll eventually just transition to Troy Brown Jr. being there.
For sure.
But it's a tough thing when you have on 2 separate sides of the country, Matthew Dellavedova, Dejan Vasiljevic, both talented players, both guys who have proven a lot in the NBL and abroad, but unfortunately, they don't necessarily fit the starting lineup of a team, of their respective teams, that are trying to maximize players who are just, unfortunately, just more talented or better than them, or the guys who are more sustainable if you maximize them. So it's a fascinating thing that Mike Wells has made the decision to bench down Vasiljevic. We'll see if Brian Goorjian goes down a similar route with Matthew Dellavedova, because the Kings have looked really, really good with just KD and Xavier Cooks as the two creators with spaces around them.
I think it's interesting because I don't think it's a problem as long as the players are okay with it, understanding that it can potentially help their team. So if you go back to the week 1 podcast that we had after week 1, I flagged it with you and we loosely discussed it. I said, I think there's a decision somewhere down the line of how the Sydney Kings and Brian Goorjian use Matthew Dellavedova, mostly because when you got KD, Daly, to your point, Xavier Cooks in the same lineup, a lot of guys that are probably at their best with the ball in their hands. Daly is still going to play a massive part. He's playing 26 minutes per game right now. Curious if there was anything we saw in the weekend in that dominant win over Illawarra that Brian Goorjian carries through. I would say that the number one thing that stood out to me, and it's been something that's been bugging me for the last few weeks, how did the Sydney Kings get Jalen Galloway more involved? And when we saw that Illawarra game, you had Bull Qual that was harassing Dave O'Hickey, and Galloway can guard a guard, or he can guard a wing. He can guard 1 through 4, no problems at all, even 5 at certain stages in this league. He was on Tyler Harvey, and I think he caused him a number of problems. He's shooting around 37% from 3, and every time he shoots the ball, you feel like it's going in. So interested to see what it looks like when Daly comes back into that lineup, but I do like the mix that they had, and perhaps the big thing for me, getting Galloway more involved in that lineup, a little bit more dynamic. I think we're seeing that across the league with teams going with size and athleticism. And the Adelaide 36ers are one of those teams with Troy Brown that you mentioned that came in. I think this one is a little more interesting because there is a genuine squeeze in the Adelaide rotation, particularly at the guard position, because now what we did see when DJ came out of that starting lineup, Zylan Cheatham got off the chain a little bit. And I think historically, and remind me, Olgs, if I'm wrong here, but I was thinking about all the great players that Bryce Cotton has played with along the way and the guys that have dominated, whether you think of a Nick Kay or John Mooney, even Casey Prather when he was first there a long, long time ago. I'm pretty sure they crossed over there. But a lot of the guys that have had the best success alongside Bryce Cotton have been the bigs or the wings because they can play in that screen action game. They can play out on the perimeter, and that's where Bryce can do a lot of his damage. So, it's interesting for DJ. I still think he's going to play a big part, but I did say to Ryan Brockhoff at work the other day, I said, this might be interesting. It might be good for DJ. As long as he embraces it, he's still going to find his spots and he's going to find open looks, particularly potentially when Bryce Cotton is off the floor. And Ryan did remind me, Olgs, yeah, but Bryce is never off the floor. And that is the challenge for this 36ers team. But as long as this 36ers team, the locker room stays together, I don't have a problem with it. I think that this can work, and you can't argue with the talent they have. They're absolutely stacked.
And look, so far from everything I've heard in both teams, actually, there is harmony within the locker rooms, right? So that's a big tick. But unfortunately, it's just about which players are you maximizing and how do you best do that? So in Sydney, Jalen Galloway, him playing on the wing, I think is conducive to Kendrick Davis being a better basketball player because you give him space to work with. You give Xavier Cooks space to work with. Unfortunately, when Dell is on the floor, he's not a non-shooter, but he's not a shooter. And so the floor necessarily shrinks, and I think you take away from Xavier Cooks and Kendrick Davis and what they do best. And it's the same thing in Adelaide. Bryce Cotton's on the floor for 38 minutes a game. Who is going to be next to him? He can't guard at a high level for 38 minutes. You need to put supplementary defensive pieces next to him, which is why we saw Matt Kenyon play bulk minutes against Tasmania. It's why we saw Isaac White start the third quarter in their last game against the Cairns Taipans, because they need someone who's going to go and guard the primary perimeter guy on the other team. And it doesn't feel like Mike Wells sees DJ Vasiljevic as that guy. Instead, he can come off the bench, maybe when Bryce isn't on the floor, or maybe they can cross over in short instances, and that's where he can be helpful. But again, this is a really interesting situation of ignoring talent, because those two guys that we mentioned, Deli and DJ, they're both talented, but they're looking for function. They're looking for balance on the floor. So really bold decision from Mike Wells. I'm curious to see maybe Deli's minutes, 26 a game right now. Maybe they drop to 20 minutes. Maybe that's the best thing for him when you're approaching the playoffs. So a lot of interesting decisions to be made against for teams that are doing really well right now. So these are sort of good conversations that I think these teams are having internally.
Yeah, not only are the teams playing well, but they're teams that seem to be bought in. And that's the one thing I'll say about DJ. For some reason, he gets a lot of flack, but I think because he does like doing the media stuff and he's a confident guy. But I would say everything that DJ has said this year has been towing the team line, whether he's sticking up for Bryce Cotton, whether he's sticking up for other teammates. This does feel like a team that is together. That is not something we've said about the Adelaide 36ers for quite a while. But he's also a confident guy, and I know he loves playing, and I know he backs himself in at all times. The last two games, 16 minutes, 17 minutes. That is the lowest minutes total in a game he's had since December 2021 by my records going off Real GM. So it is a legitimate change. And as you pointed to, it's one thing if Troy Brown comes into the lineup. We'll see when you have Isaac White and then Matt Kenyon comes in the starting lineup like that. Maybe the fit is better for Adelaide, but hopefully they all stay on board there. And I still would back that he's going to have moments. We saw him in the game against Tassie, had some moments. Saw him hit a couple of shots in the game against Cairns. So something to track because everything seems like it's going well in both of those locker rooms right now. You mentioned Xavier Cooks, Ogs. Now, there was a situation that went down in the freeway series, the highway series, whatever the heck they call it, with Xavier Cooks and Davo Hickey. It was in the second quarter of this game. Let's take a look what went down.
Kendrick Davis doesn't deliver there. Peatling tries to keep it in play, does. Aerial battle, won by Xavier Cooks, and then he's blocked by Blanchfield, and the foul is called in Sydney's favour. It's Blanchfield pinged by the referees, and the crowd doesn't like it.
Well, you forgot a key adjective, Matty. The late foul call is what has the natives very upset. Hickey feels like he got it clean.
Act of violence following the foul play.
So short. So sweet. That's what they all say, but I'm saying it.
That's nothing. Please, stop it. Stop booing. That's nothing.
You can't call that.
So Xavier Cooks originally offered his hand to get up. Wilson, I'm not taking it. And that's
cool.
Said, righto, we'll get back down there.
That's cool. Play on.
Play on.
All right, so if you are active on social media or you follow NBL 26 and you're watching the game on ESPN, you would have seen what went down. Act of violence was the words that the officials were using, Olgun, which is a very scary words, and it is quite alarming. You do not want to see an act of violence on a basketball floor. What did you make of this situation with Cooks and Hickey, and really what followed the incident or the non-incident?
I'm surprised that we didn't have to throw an R rating on that substantial act of violence.
This is an adult podcast. This is an adult
graphic
podcast.
warning.
It is not for the faint-hearted.
We got an MA 15 plus podcast showing that act of violence. It was the most. It's the thing that I've criticized the refs for the most this season, which is being fearless. And you just have to recognize just like the human interaction that happened there, which was Xavier Cooks trying to help him up. David Hickey, proud guy, didn't want to take it, so it looked like Xavier was sort of just going to tap him on the knee. The balance was off, and he fell down. You also have to recognize that these guys are friends. They were talking before, they were laughing with each other before the game. They were laughing with each other in that moment as well. These guys were teammates at the FIBA Asia Cup in the offseason. So these are two friends here. This is not some malicious interaction between these two guys. So again, it felt fearless. It's the fact that it went up to the review center and they watched it 1,000 times and came to that determination. It's just silly. We've seen some wild text this year, but from between this one and the John Brown, the wave away, man, there's been some crazy stuff this season, and I don't get it. Again, I feel like where NBL purports to be this amazing physical league, but we can't take those tiny instances of tension. It's really weird stuff, man.
The thing that really disturbed me the most with this situation, because you pointed to the lengthy conversation that the officials had after this incident, and you talk about the league and the message they want to get out, and hey, we're working on the officiating, and hey, it's going to get better. The three officials, I don't know who the third guy was off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure that was Vaughn Maybury, right? One of the most experienced officials in the league. And then you had, was it Nico that was out there as well? So
Nico was there too.
So two of your most prominent officials that you have in the league, and they could not put their heads together and look at the situation and go, okay, this is absolutely nothing. There is nothing going in on this. And people can sit back, and I know we heard the audio and there was a little bit of laughter and everyone was kind of light about the whole situation, but you can't be, because this was a game that the Sydney Kings had in control. But Xavier Cooks ends up going to the bench because he's in foul trouble. So they have opted to make a legitimately, potentially game-changing decision that everyone watching this game understands that it is wrong. Everyone understands that this is a terrible look for the league. And this is two of your three most experienced officials that you have. So if those guys can't come to the most sensible situation that this was obviously not an act of violence, as I put the air quotes up, or anything that deserved to be escalated, then that is part of the problem. And that's why people watch this league and shake their head and say that it still has a long way to go, particularly with the officiating. The league has come out, we had discussions. I had discussion with the CEO, David Stevenson. He said, we're working on it and we're getting more full-time refs and we're putting more time into it. But when you can't get stuff like that right, and you're taking one of the best players in the league off the floor for something that was absolutely nothing, this is more than just laugh about it and go away. And the league should come out and say, hey, we really stuffed that up and we apologize. And this is the type of stuff that we're trying to get better, because it just wasn't good enough.
Yeah, it's I don't like being in a situation where I rock up to an arena and I see right now I see Vaughn Mayberry, or I see Chris Reed, or I see Michael Aylen, and like I want to feel safe in their hands, right? At this point, you just never know what you're going to get. And then I fear that when you don't have one of those experienced guys as a crew chief, man, it's a free for all. You have no idea what you're going to get. You could have 80 free throws in that game. You could have none. The inconsistency is wild to me. And the thing, I was in the stadium at the time, right? So I heard everyone booing, and I'm looking around thinking, what are you guys doing booing? And Xavier Cooks is a Wollongong boy too, so I get there's some animus there, whatever. But going back and rewatching it, I like Derek Rucker in that situation. Just flatly, just don't boo. Like that's a good reaction to that. It was, and again, I appreciate the tribal nature of fans, and they see any little thing, they try to get an advantage. But I feel like there's some sort of sportsmanship and gamesmanship just to say, like that's soft as hell. Yeah. We're not gonna touch that.
Hey, maybe they were booing the officials. But anyway, I feel like we talk about it every week. But when you have stuff like that, I think it's worth bringing up, because you have to try and keep them accountable, because it wasn't good enough. Cooks went to the bench. They ended up winning the game by a stack anyway. But to me, not a laughing matter. I thought it was ridiculous and pretty annoying when you're trying to watch a game with the stars on the floor. My note from the weekend, Melbourne United, we've discussed the depth, and certainly Shea Dash coming back into this lineup and how important it felt, just because there was so much defensively being put on Dash Daniels. And we saw a stretch early in the game against the Brisbane Bullets. Now, look, I'm not trying to say that this Melbourne United defense was locking down one of the all-time great lineups, because Brisbane Bullets were piecing together rotation under Stu Lash, because every import they had left the team, whether by injury or other stuff. But I just looked at the few minutes we had with Dash Daniels, Shea Dash in the backcourt. They really got the game back on track. And the most underrated role player in the league, I'm saying it, Fab Krizlovic, just changes what this team does defensively as well. But that backcourt in particular, is that already the best defensive backcourt that we have in the league? Because you know this, and people talk to you all the time. I'm traveling around the US, going to these NBA games, and everyone sees what Dyson Daniels is doing. So naturally, they're asking about Dash. And I do think that there's this idea that, oh, well, the numbers aren't great. He's only got 6 points, a couple rebounds a game. He mustn't be doing much. He's playing 16 minutes per game, and he's not just defending, off in the corner, being hidden by Dean Vickerman. He's guarding Bryce Cotton. He's guarding Kendrick Davis. He's getting the best players on the opposition and standing up. His IQ is off the charts. His ability to be in the right spots, his hands, which runs in the family, as we understand. This is a scary defensive duo and gives Dean Vickerman yet another lever to pull when they do get to the postseason.
When Dash first signed with Melbourne, the first thing I thought was, I don't know if Dean loves playing young players. And so I was slightly concerned. I was thinking, where are these minutes going to come from? But his ability to guard, stay in front of guys, to be handsy defensively, to create plays defensively, that defensive playmaking is something that Dean Vickerman loves, right? It's the reason why Shea Dash is a constant on his teams, because he loves that kind of player. And so we've seen Dash Daniels finish games over Chris Golding, right? That's a wild thing to think about in theory, but it's happened because Dash Daniels is someone who can stay in front and who can guard at the level. For someone who is so young, that's so impressive. And I look at this Melbourne lineup, and their best lineup might not even have Chris Golding in it. There was a lineup they ran with toward the end of that game against Brisbane that was Shea Dash at the point, Tyson Walker at the 2, Milton Doyle, Finn Delaney, and Jesse Edwards. And defensively, that's an unbelievable 5 that's on the floor. And then the fact that you can throw Chris Golding in there and the elite shooting that he brings, and you can throw Dash Daniels in there and what he brings, and the fact that when Jesse Edwards goes to the bench, you bring in Fab Krizlovic, who's almost just as effective at defensively. He's the best wall-up guy in the league. They just have pieces everywhere who can just do the job to perfection. But, man, I don't know if a team has had this sort of defensive firepower, especially on the perimeter, in Shea Dash, Dash Daniels, Tyson Walker, and then on the back line, you have Jesse Edwards waiting for you. It's a very scary proposition, and it's no surprise that United is the number 1 defense in the league and has been all season long, and I really don't see it changing.
Yeah, they have 9 guys, Melbourne United, that have played 350-plus possessions in the season. Dash Daniels, the team's defensive rating when he is on the floor is 101. Only Fab Krislovic, the team has a better defensive rating when he's on there. I think they share a lot of the minutes. But the point being that he is their number one point of attack guy, or has been before Shea Dash out there. And it has not impacted this defense at all. And for a guy that's 17 years old, that is not normal. This is not something normal that we're seeing, albeit overall, as you pointed to, great depth on this team. I'm interested with that Chris Golding take. I want to monitor that and get back to that in another week of the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour. But now, a segment we are going to call Sound Off, Olgun. And this is where we get to have a take, maybe something that's bothered us, but a little bit emotional about from the week of hoops. And I just clear the decks and say, Olgun, tell us what you got. What have you got for Sound Off?
I am just astounded by the import turnover that we're seeing. And I'm trying to put my finger on why. And I think I've got it down to two things. One is the quality of imports that are available to NBL teams is unfortunately dwindling. The third two-way has taken so many of the potential players off the table. It's not just the guys getting the two-ways. It's the 30 players in each market who think that they're in contention to get that third two-way. And so the talent pool is necessarily dwindling. There's more money than ever in Europe. Wait until NBA Europe comes in a couple of years, and that's just going to take more potential imports off the table. That's one. But number two is the decision makers of some of these NBL teams who are just not putting in the legwork when it comes to gathering the intel on some of these players, putting it into practice, using that intel to make their decisions. It seems like either teams have ignored some of the off-court intel we've heard about certain players, or they're just ignoring them and signing those guys anyway. So then it just makes sense that we've had 6 or 7 imports already leave us, most of which were because of intel issues that we all foresaw, we all knew about, or if they did know about it and ignored it, I think that's malpractice. If they didn't know about it, that's also malpractice. So the inability of these teams to recruit effective imports, sustainable imports that can stay in this league, it's wild to me, and it's takes me to a conversation I had with James Newman, the new GM of basketball for Hoops Capital, the Sydney Kings and Sydney Flames. He said a decision in the summer is something that you're always going to regret. Right? We can inverse it. A decision in the winter, you can't fix that during a season. You were necessarily on the back foot if you make a bad decision in the winter in the NBL. And it feels like too many teams have made those bad decisions, and a lot of them are hurting because of it.
Yeah, you're so plugged into this part of basketball that, I see a lot of these guys, as you know, Olgun, we had a great time in Las Vegas at Summer League, and that's where they're around, and that's where I get sort of a feel for, what teams are looking at. The one comment I would make, aside from everything you've said, when you talk about the teams and the decision makers they have, I don't think that there's ever been more asked of NBL teams because of the crunch of potential player talent, but also because of what the top of the league is doing and how they're organized. And we certainly do, and maybe fans get frustrated, but we look at teams like Melbourne and Sydney that are just organizationally just great from top all the way to bottom. I know there's been a little bit of a change in Sydney, but that does put more pressure on other teams like a Cairns, like a Brisbane, to get it right and get organized, like the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix, all these other teams. All of a sudden, you make 1 or 2 bad decisions, as you pointed to, it's going to be hard to get out of that hole in the middle of the season. We're seeing these changeovers now. And I think that this is one of the big questions when we talk about expansion moving forward. Are we ready for that? Are we ready to add another team or two that also has to now jump into this mix and try and stay competitive in this league? So I think it's fascinating. I think it's a bigger conversation that we could have at some point. And maybe we get someone on the pod, Olgs, to talk through the decision-making in a season, because I think it's a great point you make. And it's almost been a little unprecedented how much change we have seen.
Yeah. And again, we're not even halfway through the season.
Yeah.
I think there's been 6 or 7 imports who have been cut. And again, largely because of intel issues that a lot of us knew about. And if you didn't know about it, that's probably even worse. What's your thing?
Javon Freeman Liberty, by the way, go to ESPN.com.au. Olgun has some info there. He's left Brisbane, then
he's back
at Brisbane, and I don't think Jalen Adams is coming back. Anyway, the Brisbane Bullets are just a turnover there as they try and stay in the mix here. Now, my sound off. Now, there's one thing that I want to make clear. We're recording this. It's 5:30 p.m. over here on the East Coast in America, and I'm very hungry. I would love a flame-grilled Whopper right now, or maybe a bacon deluxe, because there's nothing I love more than Hungry Jacks. Great supporters of basketball, and they keep us in a job. There's no doubt about that. But something went down in Tasmania a few nights ago, and I want to throw to the vision. This is Isaac Humphries at the free throw line in Tasmania.
No, he's not. And I would definitely get a third import because, like you said, it isn't about winning regular season games. It's about winning the whole thing. It's about beating somebody 3 times in the championship series. And we've seen the last few years, Rice hasn't been able to get it done on his own. And he had Christian Doolittle, he had Dylan Windler, he had Keanu Pinder. Came up just a bucket short. But if the rules are you can have 3 imports, why not use it?
Oh, he misses both. And there's something for the crowd to take away for tonight. The free cheeseburger at Hungry Jack's code word dessert, I should say, dessert. Maybe a few of them will get dessert on the way home.
We need something out for the crowd, for us too. Yeah, hell yeah. And when you get there, make sure you tell them Isaac sent you.
This really bothered me, Olgun. And I understand there will be people out there that will say, you don't need to be a Scrooge. Let people have fun. This is a Tasmania team that is down by 26 points in this game, and the jubilation of the fans and the excitement of the fans, that really bothers me. What happened to the days when your team gets stomped on their home floor, you're depressed for days. You go to work the next day and you're upset. You've got tears in your eyes, and you're wondering if this is a team that can dig it, turn it around. When you go to the schoolyard, you get picked on by your mates because your team just let you down, and you are so disappointed, and it ruins your whole entire week. We need to teach the kids that, look, we love Hungry Jacks, and this is one of the great promotions in world sport, and everyone loves it. But maybe it is time to have rules that when you're losing by 20 plus points on your home floor, there's no cheeseburgers for anyone because no one deserves a cheeseburger. You need to go home and think about what's happened and hope for the best moving forward. I just watched this and I said, why are people so excited? They should be upset right now. They're getting absolutely dominated. Their season is spiraling out of control. I can't have you so happy for a cheeseburger. What do you think about this, Olgs? Let's put some rules in place.
5 straight losses. Let the Tassie fans have a win. Let them have that. Like, and we know we go to so many sports games. How many times do you see like a close game? It's tied with 10 seconds left, and the jumbotron starts showing people, and everyone, and then they see themselves, they start cheering. I'm tense and anxious in those moments, so I don't know how fans all of a sudden can escape from that tension and start cheering because they're on the jumbotron. Fans get really weird just at the best of times, right? And so, man, if your team has lost 5 games and at the current moment without an import and without Will Magnate, there's really no hope to win games. Man, let them have some burgers, man.
They did actually have a bit of a rally after that moment. Maybe the fans inspired this team to come back in the fourth quarter. But all I'm saying is, I know, and I'm a little bit different, and people maybe would say, Kane, you need to get a life. But I remember, when my sports teams lost when I was a kid, no cheeseburger was going to put a smile on my face. I couldn't even stomach it. I would throw up if I had a cheeseburger. That's how upset I was about what went down on the floor, and I wouldn't be able to sleep at night, and I'd be upset for days. And then, the next game comes around and the optimism is back. You're like, hey, we can win. We can actually turn this season around. David Johnson's coming back. Will Magnay not too far away. So obviously a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, but I thought that people probably should have been a little bit more upset about the situation. But anyway, Tassie Jack Jumpers, the team I love, man. Yeah, they're in a bit of trouble, but we'll move on from them. Final notes that we do have, and you did mention the Sydney Kings and a new GM at Hoops Capital. You've got a story at ESPN.com.au, so we would direct everyone to go check that out. But what can you tell us? A little bit of a change at the top.
It's really interesting. I'm surprised that it didn't create more fanfare because James Newman, a young GM, was just the general manager of Paris Basketball. He was there for a few seasons. He was there effectively for their inception, and he helped build them to a French league title, a Euro Cup title. They're now in the Euro League. So he's played a significant role in a pretty substantial team over in another big metropolis. And the Sydney Kings were able to go through their interview process. They poached him from Paris. He comes into Sydney, and I had a chat with him a couple of days ago, and he's a really smart guy, really thoughtful, has a network, obviously, that spans across the globe. And you look at what Paris Basketball has done. Obviously, he had Will Weaver there a few seasons ago, and so that was his first sort of visibility into the Sydney Kings and Sydney basketball and the NBL. But since then, they've had Tuamas Isolo, who's a sitting head coach in the NBA. They had Tiago Splitter, who's a sitting head coach in the NBA. So Newman has the runs on the board. He has demonstrated that he can lead a franchise to success and deal with high-profile people, and that's what he'll have to do in Sydney. He's going to be working with Luke Longley, and you have Brian Gorge in there, and you have the voice of Andrew Bogut there. So there are a lot of stakeholders involved, and he's going to have to step in and handle that. But he worked under David Kahn in Paris and worked with some of these high-profile coaches. So he seems like a really good fit to step into Hoops Capital, to run the Sydney Kings, run the Sydney Flames. And I like there's some sort of youthful energy, some different sort of basketball decision-making juice that's been inserted into the NBL.
Newman is taking over Hoops Capital.
Of course.
He does look very young. I will say that. That was my first takeaway when I saw the photo.
I believe
but anyway,
he's 33.
Yeah, no, he's a real youngster. But check that out, ESPN.com.au. We discussed organizationally what teams are doing. Sydney Kings always looking for someone with that resume and certainly has touched the NBA along their career. So we'll see how that pans out. I do get a lot of questions over here in the US about Hoops Capital and what that is and why that's Sydney. And I have to say it's just what they call themselves. They just call themselves Hoops Capital.
Just the name of the company.
Yeah, no,
I have to tell, man, people go at me on Twitter. They say Melbourne's the Hoops Capital. Like, dog, it's the name of it's like the P2Y Limited. Like, it's the name of the company. You have to write it, unfortunately.
I was going to say Paris. I was going to say Paris to Sydney. It's tough. But anyway, I don't want to upset. I don't want to upset anyone. Hey, last thought for this podcast. I know I mentioned Dash Daniels and a little bit earlier in the podcast, and you look at some of the mock drafts, and as I said, it seems like Dash is sliding a little bit. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think if you're really clued into what he's doing in this league at his age. But I was watching the Breakers the other night in that game against Perth. They go down. And I was really impressed. I continue to be more and more impressed by what we're seeing from Karim Lopez, who everywhere you look looks like he's going to be a top 10 pick. So talented. But the thing I loved in this game, so he's 2 for 15 from the floor. And you think about young hoopers and maybe you're 2 for 15, you're a little bit frustrated. The night's not going the way you want it to go. But he still found a way. 10 rebounds, 5 on the offensive glass, a couple of those, putbacks. He would get his own rebound, really fighting, almost turning into a little bit of a garbage man for a New Zealand Breakers team that was struggling on offense in this game. I just think it's great science. We know that he's got the flash. We know he's got the touch from the outside. We know he's an athlete, but he also has that competitiveness in him to find a way to impact a game when the shot isn't falling. This guy looks legit. He's so fun to watch. And the Breakers, man, I know they're a little bit out of it now, but they're really becoming a fun team to watch. And Karim Lopez is a big part of that. I understand why people think he'll be a high draft pick.
Yeah, the Breakers' record, I don't think, gives us an indication of how good they can be. They're more redeemable.
Like it, yeah.
No, they've been in a lot of these games. They probably should have won half of them. They're more redeemable than I think some of the other teams that are in that sort of area on the ladder are. Yes. And Karim Lopez in the NBL, he's got this physical point of difference. He's got an athletic point of difference. He's clearly more confident in the jumper. He's not a no-leave shooter, but he knows that when he gets an inch, he will shoot the ball. And I really like that because at the next level, that's the position, that's the player profile that he's going to have to slot into. So I like what he's done there. And the thing that's impressed me most is some of the off-the-dribble stuff we've seen from Karim Lopez this season, where he'll basically ISO against someone. There's like a spin move, but he keeps the dribble alive, and then he uses those long strides to get on the rim. So he's been doing some impressive stuff. You can see physically why NBA teams would be enamored by what he is. So I hope the Breakers get back on track. Again, I have hope in that team. There are redeemable aspects about how they're going about things, and a big part of that will be Karim Lopez continuing to play at the level he is. But their struggles, I don't think, are down to what he's doing. I'll say that they're down to some of their depth and some sort of issues with the imports. But I think Karim Lopez is doing his job and some. I think he's exceeding expectations right now.
Hey, well said. 6th spot still up for grabs. So look, we said at the top, plenty going on in the NBL. It feels like it's just starting to get interesting. Certainly the first couple of rounds, I was like, what is happening with the standard of hoops in the NBL? But I feel like we're right on track, just about to hit the halfway mark. So anyway, this was a fun podcast. Plenty more to get to. We do hit NBA, college, everything else as well. So let us know if there's something we've missed or something you want us to discuss in future weeks. As I said, rate, review, do all that stuff. We really appreciate that. We will be back next Tuesday. Remember, Ignite Cup on ESPN. Nothing but net. Aussie Hoops before that. Plenty to discuss on ESPN. Check out all Olgun's work at espn.com.au. But for myself, Kane Pittman, and Olgun Ulich, a message from both of us. Remember, losing really does matter, and it should ruin your day.
Burgers matter.